This was how a wicked biker stumped on Keanu Reeves' pet dog Daisy after shooting a movie on set. What began as a dare among the ruthless bikers soon escalated beyond their very own control. Kindly subscribe and stay tuned as we uncover the shocking details and escalation of this story. It was a typical summer afternoon in Brooklyn Heights, the sun casting long, lazy shadows across the streets. The area was buzzing with its usual energy, tourists strolling, locals chatting, and the occasional dog walker passing by. The neighborhood had a peaceful charm, with its cobblestone streets and row houses, but on this particular day, the calm would soon be shattered. At the heart of it all was Keanu Reeves, who had just finished a long stretch of filming for his latest role in John Wick. The set, temporarily set up in the area, had been bustling with activity all morning. Crew members rushed about, cameras rolling, lights adjusting, and sound equipment whirring. The scent of street food wafted in from nearby vendors, offering an aroma of hot dogs, pretzels, and roasted nuts, adding to the lively atmosphere. After a long day of shooting, the director, a no-nonsense type with a loud voice, called a break. "That's a wrap for this scene, folks. Take an hour for lunch and meet back here when it's time to resume," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the crew dispersing. The crew sighed in relief as they made their way to the catering truck, eager to fuel up before the next round of shots. Keanu, however, had other plans. He had become quite attached to Daisy, the pit bull that had been featured in the movie's scenes. Daisy had played a significant role in the film, and Keanu had grown fond of the dog over the past few days. "Hey, Keanu, we're heading to that new deli on Atlantic Avenue. Want to come with us?" one of the crew members called out, a friendly smile on their face. Keanu turned to acknowledge the voice but quickly waved them off. "Thanks. But I think I'll stay here and take Daisy for a walk," he replied, his attention shifting to the dog. Daisy was panting heavily, his tongue lolling out of his mouth from the heat of the afternoon. The crew member shrugged and waved. "Suit yourself. We'll catch you later." Keanu knelt down to Daisy, his large hands gently ruffling the dog's fur. "You look like you need a break too, Daisy. How about we go for a walk? A nice quiet one, away from all this chaos." The dog, sensing Keanu's kindness, gave a soft whine of approval, his tail wagging enthusiastically. Daisy's handler, a lanky man with a clipboard under his arm, hesitated before speaking up. "Mr. Reeves, if you don't mind, I can handle Daisy's walk. That's my job, after all." Keanu smiled and shook his head. "It's all right. I'd really like to do it if that's okay with you. It'll help me bond with him, and I'm curious about what it's like to have a dog for a while." He made a face. "Besides, I've never really had one." The handler seemed unsure but nodded. "Okay, Mr. Reeves, just make sure he's all right. He's a good dog, but he can be a handful at times." Keanu reassured him with a smile and took the leash. The handler handed him a few plastic bags and a collapsible water bowl. With a final check of the supplies, Keanu was ready. "Thanks, I'll be careful." "Don't worry." Keanu bent down to Daisy, attaching the leash to the dog's collar. "All right, Daisy, let's go for a walk." With that, they set off, leaving behind the bustling set and heading into the streets of Brooklyn Heights. As they walked, Keanu took in the familiar sights of the neighborhood, his mind briefly wandering back to the set. He had always enjoyed working in Brooklyn Heights. It was vibrant, eclectic, and full of life. But today, there was something different in the air. The heat seemed to weigh everything down, the sidewalks almost empty, save for a few passers-by. Daisy, meanwhile, seemed more and more agitated. His panting intensified as they moved, and Keanu noticed the dog's increasing discomfort. "I know, Daisy. It's hot," Keanu murmured. "Let's find a water fountain, all right?" They walked for several blocks, the warm pavement reflecting heat waves into the air. Keanu looked around, scanning for a place where they could find some shade and, hopefully, some water for Daisy. As they approached a corner, Keanu's eyes locked onto a sign, "Iron and Ash." The faded letters seemed to echo through the air, signaling a place where bikes roared and the smell of gasoline hung heavy. Keanu hesitated, sensing the change in atmosphere. There, parked in front of the bar, were gleaming motorcycles, powerful and imposing like sentinels guarding a fortress. The roar of engines and the occasional shouts of bikers made Keanu's grip on the leash tighten slightly. Still, his eyes drifted to the side, catching a glimpse of a public water fountain nestled between two parked motorcycles. It was a small oasis, a potential relief for Daisy. "Let's go get you some water," Keanu said to the dog, guiding him toward the fountain. Daisy eagerly drank from the fountain as Keanu filled the collapsible bowl. As they were standing there, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms approached. He paused beside Keanu, glancing at Daisy with a soft smile. "Nice dog you got there," he said, his voice gruff but friendly. "Pit bulls get a bad rap, you know? Same way we bikers do. Loyal to a fault, both of us, if you treat 'em right." Keanu chuckled, appreciating the man's words. "You're right about that," he replied. "There's a lot more to both of us than meets the eye." The man nodded, then headed toward the door of iron and ash, leaving Keanu to observe the steady stream of bikers entering and exiting. Keanu took the opportunity to relax, watching as Daisy finished his drink. Just as he was about to leave, a waitress from the bar emerged, her face lighting up when she saw Daisy. "Oh, what a handsome boy!" she exclaimed, kneeling down to pet him. Daisy responded with a gentle lick, and the waitress laughed. "He's kinder than half the men inside," she whispered, giving Keanu a playful wink. Keanu chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment," he nodded, tipping his hat in appreciation. As they prepared to leave, however, the atmosphere shifted. From a distance, Keanu heard raised voices, loud, aggressive. A group of bikers had gathered around the waitress, who stood her ground, her voice firm. "I told you yesterday, your gang's not welcome here anymore," she said, her tone unyielding. "After what happened last time, the boss made it clear. You're banned." Keanu's protective instincts flared as the situation quickly escalated. One of the bikers, a hulking man with a shaved head, stepped forward menacingly. "Move aside, sweetheart," he growled, "or we'll move you ourselves." Bookmark. The air was thick with tension as Keanu stood frozen, the situation rapidly escalating before him. His instinct was clear. He couldn't just stand by and watch, especially not when Daisy was involved. But Keanu wasn't a man given to rash actions. He had learned over the years to keep his composure, especially in moments like this. Yet even he could feel the adrenaline starting to rise, the familiar feeling of danger creeping up his spine. He watched as the waitress, despite the fear creeping into her eyes, remained resolute. She had clearly dealt with situations like this before, but even Keanu could tell she was now outnumbered and outmanned. He could see the bikers towering over her, their stances menacing, their voices growing louder and more hostile. "Move aside, sweetheart," the burly biker with the shaved head growled, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. "You've got no say in this. We're not leaving." Keanu's eyes flickered to Daisy, who was standing next to him, his body tense and his tail low. The dog wasn't growling, but Keanu could feel the animal's unease. This wasn't just about a fight over territory. It was about dominance, intimidation, and control. Before Keanu could take another step, one of the other bikers emerged from the crowd, his voice low but resolute. "Hey, enough," he said, his tone warning. "You heard the lady. Time to go." The biker who had been the loudest, the one who had shoved the waitress, hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he locked gazes with Keanu. For a brief moment, it felt like time stood still between them. Keanu could see the hate flickering behind the man's eyes, but it was tempered by something else. Fear, perhaps. He knew who Keanu was, and Keanu knew this wasn't a fight he should start, but neither could he just walk away. The other bikers, seeing the tension, started to back up a little, sensing that the situation could turn quickly. Keanu made the decision then. It wasn't about fighting, but he wasn't about to let this escalate any further. "Let's go, Daisy," he said in a calm voice, taking a firm grip on Daisy's leash. He led the dog away from the brewing conflict, but not before casting one last glance over his shoulder. The bikers had taken a step back, but the one who had instigated the confrontation was still glaring at him, rage in his eyes. Keanu moved away, walking briskly but with purpose, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing as they distanced themselves from the volatile situation. Daisy trotted beside him, his usual carefree gait now slightly subdued as if sensing the undercurrent of danger that had just passed. Keanu's thoughts raced. He didn't like leaving things unfinished, especially when it came to situations like this. As they walked, Keanu's mind began to work through the conflict that had just unfolded. This wasn't the first time he had encountered this kind of aggression in Brooklyn Heights, but it was the first time he had seen it up close. The biker gang, Iron and Ash, had made a name for themselves in the neighborhood. But it was clear they weren't just about motorcycles and loud music. There was something darker lurking beneath their tough exterior, something that had started to reveal itself. And Keanu knew it wouldn't be the last time he encountered them. Keanu and Daisy continued their walk, heading away from the chaotic biker bar and into the quieter streets of Brooklyn Heights. The city felt different now, more oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something he couldn't ignore. He had done the right thing by avoiding the confrontation, but he wasn't at peace. Not yet. They turned the corner onto a narrow, tree-lined street, the shade offering a bit of relief from the harsh midday sun. The sound of the traffic seemed farther away now, muffled by the canopy of leaves above them. Keanu's thoughts drifted back to the earlier moments. It wasn't just about Daisy, it was about what was happening to the community, the way things were slowly spiraling out of control. As they walked further, Keanu spotted a quaint cafe tucked on the corner. It had a laid-back vibe, a quiet escape from the noise of the city. There were a few people sitting at tables outside enjoying their lunch, but it wasn't crowded. Keanu felt an immediate pull toward it. He needed a break, a moment to process what had just happened. He approached the cafe's outdoor seating area, the welcoming smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods mixing with the air. Daisy seemed to pick up on his mood, slowing his pace, his ears perking up as he noticed the open space. Keanu found an empty table and slipped Daisy's leash from his collar. "You stay here, Daisy. I'll grab us some coffee." The dog, obedient as always, flopped down on the chair next to him, clearly exhausted from the morning's activities. As Keanu stepped inside to place their order, the door chimed softly and a waitress greeted him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said, her eyes immediately landing on Daisy sitting patiently at the table outside. "Is that your dog?" Keanu smiled back, appreciating the attention Daisy was receiving. "Yeah, his name's Daisy," he replied. "He's a good boy." The waitress leaned against the counter, glancing back at Daisy. "He looks like a real sweetheart," she said with a smile. "Can I get you something to drink?" Keanu quickly placed his order, a coffee for himself and a small steak sandwich for Daisy. He added a special request, asking for an extra portion of steak for the dog, who was sure to be hungry after their walk. "Coming right up," the waitress said, turning away to prepare the drinks. Keanu felt his muscles relax slightly as he waited. It was a rare moment of peace, and he knew he needed it. As he sat down outside again, Daisy's tail began to wag lazily. Keanu took the time to reach into his jacket and pull out his script, spreading it out on the table. His mind wandered back to the film, to the set, but his thoughts quickly drifted back to the situation he had just left behind. The encounter with the bikers still gnawed at him. He had managed to avoid a fight, but it didn't feel like a victory. His coffee arrived, and he sipped it slowly, his mind still racing. The food would be coming soon, and Keanu hoped the rest of the day would pass without incident, but that hope was dashed all too soon. Bookmark D2V6. Keanu was in the midst of enjoying his rare moment of calm when the atmosphere around him suddenly shifted. He had just taken another sip of his coffee, Daisy resting peacefully by his side, when a loud, unmistakable sound filled the air. The unmistakable screech of tires followed by the roar of a motorcycle engine. Keanu's instinct kicked in, his attention snapping toward the sound. His eyes immediately locked onto the source. A group of bikers, their engines revving with a menacing intensity. It wasn't the same group as before, but the sight of their leather jackets and the aggressive swagger in their movements was all too familiar. They were making their way toward the cafe, and Keanu could feel the tension building in his chest. Daisy, sensing the change in the air, began to stir. The dog's eyes darted nervously, and Keanu reached down, giving him a calming pat. But it was too late to avoid the confrontation. The bikers approached the patio, their voices carrying over the clink of coffee cups and the murmur of other patrons. Keanu's gaze remained steady, watching them closely. He had a sinking feeling in his gut that this wasn't just another ordinary interaction. The bikers weren't just passing by, They were here for something or someone. "Hey," one of them called out loudly, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Nice dog you got there. Looks like a tough guy, huh?" Keanu remained silent, choosing not to engage immediately. His hand rested on Daisy's back, the dog's tense muscles beneath his fingers a sign of the unease that had settled into the pit of Keanu's stomach. "You think you're so tough," the biker continued, stepping closer to the table. "Walking around with a dog like that? Don't you know what happens to animals in places like this?" The man's tone grew darker, more threatening. Keanu's heart began to beat faster, his protective instincts flaring up. He had been in countless confrontations on film sets, but this was different. This wasn't acting. This was real. And this was about his dog. Daisy's tail stiffened, and he gave a soft growl, sensing the aggression in the air. Keanu's grip tightened on the dog's leash, but he didn't stand up yet. He wasn't sure if this was just empty posturing or something more dangerous. "You really want to test that?" The biker spat, his voice full of menace. "Maybe your dog doesn't belong in a place like this." He looked down at Daisy, who was now growling low in his throat, his body tense. Keanu stood slowly, his eyes narrowing, his body language shifting. His calm demeanor was about to be tested, but he wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "I think you should leave," Keanu said quietly, his voice laced with the calm confidence that came from years of being in control of chaotic situations. "I'm not looking for a fight." The biker laughed darkly, clearly not expecting Keanu to respond with such poise. "Not looking for a fight? Too bad, because you're going to get one anyway." The situation was escalating quickly, and Keanu's senses were on high alert. This wasn't just a casual confrontation. This was a power struggle, an attempt to assert dominance in a place that was supposed to be peaceful. And in that moment, Keanu realized something. This wasn't going to be solved by words alone. Bookmark. Before Keanu could fully react, the biker's hand shot out, a swift motion meant to provoke. With a suddenness that caught Keanu off guard, the man kicked Daisy hard in the side, sending the dog tumbling to the ground with a startled yelp. The peaceful cafe atmosphere shattered, replaced by the sharp sound of Daisy's distress. "Daisy!" Keanu shouted, his voice filled with alarm as he immediately dropped to his knees, reaching for the dog. The cafe patrons stared, shocked by the aggression, some of them beginning to stand, but nobody dared to step in. Daisy, despite the initial shock, scrambled back onto his feet, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. He growled, his protective instinct fully activated now, but Keanu could see the fear in the dog's eyes. This wasn't just about a kick, it was an act of cruelty, and Daisy was simply responding to it. Keanu's anger flared like a wildfire. He stood up with alarming speed, his eyes locking onto the biker, whose smirk faltered when he saw the fury building within Keanu. "You just made a huge mistake," Keanu said, his voice cold and steady, though there was an undeniable edge to it. His muscles were taut with the intensity of the moment, and his body was ready to act. "You hurt my dog, and now you're going to pay for that." The biker didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, sneering as he prepared for a confrontation. "What are you going to do about it, actor boy?" His words were dripping with contempt, a challenge that Keanu had no intention of backing down from. Daisy's growls became more frequent, his body still tense but not quite ready to lunge. Keanu placed a hand on the dog's back, his touch firm yet soothing. "Calm down, Daisy," Keanu murmured. "I've got this." He turned back to face the biker, eyes narrowing with determination. "You don't get to hurt innocent creatures, not on my watch." Just as the situation seemed poised to erupt into chaos, a shift occurred. Another biker, one Keanu hadn't noticed before, emerged from the group. He was shorter than the others, with a face hardened by years of life on the road. But there was something different about him. He wasn't here for the fight. All right, the newcomer said, his voice louder now, cutting through the tension. He stepped between Keanu and the original biker, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Let's not do something we'll regret, all right?" Keanu didn't lower his guard, but his eyes flickered in the direction of the new arrival. He could sense the man wasn't fully on the side of the aggressors, though Keanu wasn't sure of his motives just yet. The first biker, still seething, took a step back, his eyes burning with rage. "This is none of your business," he spat. The newcomer's eyes locked with Keanu's, a silent understanding passing between them. Keanu wasn't sure what had caused the man to step in, but at that moment, he was thankful. "It is now," the man said firmly. "Let's get out of here before things get worse." The biker who had kicked Daisy glared one last time at Keanu before storming off, muttering under his breath. The remaining bikers, sensing the confrontation had diffused, began to follow suit. Keanu, still shaking with adrenaline, took a moment to steady himself, breathing deeply. "Thanks," he said to the man who had intervened, though his voice was laced with a quiet intensity. The man gave a brief nod, offering no words, before he turned and followed the others. Keanu, meanwhile, bent down to Daisy, who was now shaking, still reeling from the attack. "You all right, Daisy?" Keanu whispered, his voice softer than before. Daisy's eyes locked onto his, and after a tense moment, the dog wagged his tail weakly. "Good boy," Keanu said, his hands gently rubbing Daisy's head. He looked around, noticing the concerned gazes of the other cafe patrons. "I'm sorry about that," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But inside, he was seething. He had managed to avoid the worst, but the anger still simmered beneath his calm exterior. He knew this wasn't over. Whatever had happened at Iron and Ash had only just begun. The tension in the air lingered long after the bikers had left. Keanu's heart was still racing, the adrenaline from the confrontation pumping through his veins, though he worked hard to keep his calm. He didn't want to draw any more attention to himself or Daisy, but there was something about what had just transpired that gnawed at him. Daisy, for his part, seemed to be slowly recovering from the shock, his tail now wagging softly, though his body was still tense. Keanu kept his hand on the dog's back, rubbing gently, trying to reassure him. "We're all right now?" Keanu whispered, his voice low and soothing, though a slight tremor betrayed his own unease. He felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, he hadn't been able to prevent the attack, and that bothered him. Daisy had been hurt, and even though it wasn't serious, it still felt like a failure on his part. The cafe patrons had begun to resume their conversations, but there was a certain wariness in the air, a lingering unease that hung over the cafe like a storm cloud. Keanu could feel their eyes on him, but he chose to ignore them. What mattered now was getting Daisy out of there. With a final pat on Daisy's head, Keanu stood, ready to leave the scene. He motioned to the waiter who had served them earlier, still lingering nearby, seemingly unsure of whether to approach. "We're going to take off now," Keanu said, his voice steady, "but thank you for the food and the calm." The waiter nodded quickly, still wide-eyed from the events that had unfolded before him. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. I'm glad you're all right." Keanu offered a brief smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He needed to move on. This was not the end of the situation. It was merely the beginning. As Keanu left the cafe and stepped back onto the street, Daisy by his side, the gravity of what had just happened began to settle in. He didn't feel any better about the incident. No amount of walking away could erase the image of Daisy being kicked or the tension that had surged through him in that moment. Keanu wasn't sure what would come next. The bikers at Iron and Ash hadn't just been aggressive. They had been a threat, not only to Daisy but to the neighborhood. That realization dawned on him slowly. The confrontation hadn't been an isolated event. This was a pattern. The neighborhood had been changing, and not for the better. He turned to Daisy, his expression softening. "You're all right, Daisy," Keanu murmured. The dog gave a low whine in response, pressing closer to Keanu's leg as they walked. They had to get back to the set soon, but Keanu needed to clear his mind to figure out what his next move should be. As they walked down the quiet streets, Keanu's thoughts drifted back to the bikers, the ones who had caused all this trouble. Iron and Ash wasn't just a biker bar. It was a symbol of something darker, something more dangerous, that had started to infect the peaceful streets of Brooklyn Heights. Keanu felt a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't let this slide. He couldn't let the bikers keep intimidating the locals and harassing people. Not when he had the chance to make a difference. Daisy's continued quiet whine brought him back to the present. They had a few blocks left before they reached the set, but Keanu's mind was already racing. He had been in Hollywood long enough to know how to avoid trouble. But this was different. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't acting. This was real. As they neared the set, Keanu's thoughts remained tangled in the mess of the morning's events. His commitment to Daisy and the community grew stronger with every step. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew he couldn't simply walk away. They arrived back at the bustling film set, the crew still on their lunch break. Keanu led Daisy to a shaded area near the trailers, where the dog could relax while Keanu took a few minutes to gather his thoughts. He crouched next to Daisy, rubbing his ears affectionately. "You did great, Daisy. You've got to rest up now," Keanu murmured, speaking softly but with a deep sense of relief that the immediate danger had passed. But as he stood, his mind was already calculating. He needed to do something about Iron and Ash. He couldn't let those bikers run roughshod over the neighborhood, not after what had happened to Daisy. Keanu had connections, people who could help. He wasn't sure yet who he could trust with this, but he knew he had to act. There was no going back. He had made the decision in that moment on the street. He wasn't just going to sit idly by. Keanu walked toward the catering truck, his mind spinning with plans. He needed to talk to someone who could help him take this situation to the next level. There was one person he could think of, the right person for the job. Sheriff Hank Morrison. Hank had been a trusted ally for years, someone Keanu had known even before his film career had taken off. Keanu had always admired Hank's calm, steady hand when dealing with complicated situations, both on and off the job. Hank had connections that could be useful, and if anyone could help take down Iron and Ash, it was Hank. Keanu pulled out his phone and dialed Hank's number, waiting as it rang. "Keanu?" Hank's voice came through, low and familiar. "What's up?" Keanu took a deep breath before speaking, knowing that this conversation was going to lead to something serious. "Hank, I need your help. There's a biker gang in Brooklyn Heights causing trouble. They've been intimidating people, and now they hurt my dog. I need to do something about it, but I don't know how far I can go." Hank's voice was steady, professional. "I hear you. I've had a few reports about them. Iron and Ash, right?" Keanu nodded, even though Hank couldn't see it. "Yeah, that's the one. They've been a problem for a while, but now I think it's gotten worse. I need to know what you can do, and if you can help me get them out of here. I don't care how it gets done, but I need action." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Keanu could feel the wheels turning in Hank's mind. Finally, Hank spoke again, his voice firm. "You don't need to worry. I'll handle it. I'll gather some people and put a plan into motion. Stay safe, Keanu, and don't do anything rash." Keanu felt a wave of relief wash over him. Hank was the kind of man who could handle things without making a mess. The sheriff had the resources, the authority, and the experience to take down a group like Iron and Ash. "I'll wait for your call," Keanu said, his voice steady. As he hung up the phone, Keanu felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The ball was now in Hank's court. All Keanu had to do now was make sure Daisy was okay, and everything else would fall into place. So guys, in the next episode, we will see exactly how the revenge of Keanu played out and the shocking truths the sheriff discovered about the Iron Bikers. Kindly subscribe to the channel and turn on the post notification so you do not miss out on the next episode. I love you all.